Well, it's done. That is the end of Season 2 of Paramount's Silver Timeline Halo show. And the ending, the final episode? I mean, don't get me wrong, this show is fundamentally broken from the ground up. But in isolation, this episode is probably the closest it's been to being Halo. What holds this episode back, despite from the quite a few things that I will get into, is every single previous episode just makes everything, like I said, fundamentally broken. But this episode, again, being the closest it's ever been to being real Halo, there is actually some decent stuff in this episode, which honestly just frustrates me even more, because it shows me that there is, I don't know, maybe some people working on this show that are capable of doing some stuff that is Halo. Instead, we've had 2 seasons of just Silver Timeline bullshit, and don't get me wrong, that's still here, but there was some pretty strong traces of there's some competent people around here. Why the fuck were they not given this whole show? We could have had something cool, because this had some great stuff in there. This episode did have some pretty cool stuff, but it's just a shit show and a god-awful Halo adaptations. Oh, there's so much fucking with this thing. Alright, but there's actually a cameo in this episode. Noble Six? Nope. Our Lord and Savior Buck? Nope. The Mighty Fell? Nope. Just like in the previous season's final episode, Master Chief actually makes a cameo. He puts the helmet on, he puts the armor on, he shuts the fuck up, and actually does some Master Chief stuff in this episode. It's few and far between, and it's probably the only time he's actually acted like it in this whole season, and then he goes back to being Jimmy Rings that thinks he's playing Christian Bale's Batman. But let's get into this whole thing, okay? So the episode starts with the Flood is revealed in this episode. It starts with Miranda, and she's on Onyx, and again, the Flood having the breakout on Onyx is so stupid. But anyway, Silver Timeline bullshit. She's looking into the stuff that she found from the previous episode, and there's like this weird, like, happy, upbeat music in the background. And then one of the person gets infected, one of the scientists gets infected and stabs another scientist. The way this episode does the Flood, I both really like and think is incredibly dumb at the same time. It's very much like a combination, well, I got vibes of Left 4 Dead zombies with a mixture of Evil Dead's, well, 2016 Evil Dead demons, the way like their neck snaps and all that type of stuff when they're moving around. But they do this weird thing where they'll get infected, and then they'll just freeze up and not move. And then, like, the next stage of the infection, they become really violent and start attacking people. But there is parts of this episode where they will, like, full on, like, explode and have, like, a flood-like tentacle pop out of their neck, and you're, like, a combat form. You're like, yes, that, more of that. But it's kind of like the budget wasn't there, so they kind of had to turn them into, like, basic bitch space zombies for the most part, when they just run at people, like, 28 days later style. But there is, like, this pretty cool moment where you see an infection form crawl out of someone's mouth, and I don't know if it was the same one, but you see an infection form crawl into a person's eyelid as well. You're like, that's the shit. Okay, there we go. Give me more of that. But then, as that's all going on, we also have our boy Jimmy Rings, who is on the radio listening to the battle that's going on, and eventually he's going to turn around and come to save the day. We all know that. But we see Kai with the Spartan Freeze, and they're getting ready to attack this Covenant ship, and their ship gets blown up and they get sucked into outer space. It was actually kind of cool because you could see, like, Spartan arms and stuff as part of the debris. And yeah, so that's all going on. They land on the Covenant ship, but as they land on the ship, they see like I can't remember, was it a Covenant carrier? The same one from Halo Reach, the Long Night of Solace. That one, you see one of them fly over, right? And, or was it Tip of the Spear? Either way, you know what I'm talking about. You see one of them fly over and you're like, oh, yeah, look at that. They're actually using Covenant ships. Would have been nice to see some Banshees. We also actually get the fleet, the UNSC fleet arriving, and when they arrive, it looked cool. They actually look like UNSC ships, and they get fucking decimated by the Covenant. You're like, why? Why have we not been getting this the whole time? Why are we just getting it now? Like I said, It's the good things end up frustrating me more because of how shit this whole thing's been. And when we get the good stuff, you're like, why weren't you just doing that the whole fucking time? All right. But anyway, so Kaya is leading the assault with the Spartan Freeze on board the ship. And man, she picks up a carbine. We see needlers. The fight is actually pretty good. There is a bit of wanky la-di-da shit with Perez, but Kaya was... This was the most I've ever actually liked Kaya in this whole show. She actually acted like a Spartan and was prepared to sacrifice herself. Just like a Spartan. So that fight within the corridors is all cool. It eventually gets to a stage where they're going to put the spike into the ship. And we all know what's going to happen. Kaya knows what's going to happen. It's going to cause this big-ass explosion. But, she's like, hey, this is a one-way trip. And I think Perez says, I always knew this was a one-way trip and all that type of shit. And just as she's about to do it... But just as she's about to stick the spike in, we can see there's some elites in the corridor getting massacred. And it turns out it's Master Chief. Not Jimmy Rings, not Master Cheeks. It's Master Chief. He's using an energy sword and he kills 10 elites. And you're like, that's the shit we wanted to see. Again, so very, 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 very frustrating. There's also this weird side thread with Soren and Quan, but that's also to do with the Flood. And the Flood is so hit and miss in this part. Like I said, when they explode and their tentacles come out, looks fantastic. They do some actual Flood shit. But when they're not that and they're just in phase and then they turn to 28 days later and just run at them, yeah, that stuff was kind of whack. Alright, but then aboard the Covenant ship with Maki and Cortana, Maki's, I don't know, it's this weird jealous ex-girlfriend type shit going on with Maki. And she ends up destroying the, what is it called? The chip that Cortana's in. She steps on it, but don't worry, Cortana is in the system of the Covenant ship. I don't know how Maki didn't figure that out. I'm pretty sure she actually knew about it. But anyway, so that's all going on, and she thinks she's killed Cortana. It kind of jumps back and forth on Onyx, with the Flood starting to have their outbreak. Don't worry, she kills quite a few of them because she is the Great Quan. There is a weird quad moment later on. But then from there, Master Chief decides that he actually has to go and save Cortana aboard that ship. And he does the typical Master Chief, I'm just going to throw myself into outer space, and starts cruising down to it. By this point, Halsey has been captured. She's brought onto the command center where Paranosky's like, you'll have to tell Master Chief to abort his mission and go to the Halo Ring or we're all going to die. And Halsey does the exact opposite. She's looking at it and going, hey, if you want to land on the Covenant ship, this is the best spot to land into. Yeah, okay, cool. I'm cool with that. So he lands on the ship, tries to save Cortana, realizes that Cortana's chip is destroyed, and he has this brilliant idea to just take his fist and just ram it through the control, the computer controls of the Covenant ship, and Cortana downloads herself into him. Okay, I don't think that's how it works, but whatever. And that's when the Flood outbreak happens on the command center. And pretty much everyone on that command center is killed, including Paranosky. Except for Halsey, who does manage to escape. And she does something I consider to be very Halsey-like behavior, is close the door behind her. She's the first one out and closes the door. And then she runs off and meets back up with Miranda. And just to jump forward a little bit, she turns out that Halsey is infected by the Flood, and Miranda puts her in some cryo sleep, saying, hey, I'm going to come back and I'm going to find a cure. Alright, listen. If there is a cure for the Flood in this universe, the whole point of the Halo Rings is redundant. If there is a cure for the Flood in this Silver timeline, there's no point of even having the Flood. The whole reason the Flood is such a threat is because they can't be stopped. The Forerunners had to create the Halo Rings to essentially kill their food to stop the Flood. Very long story short. So if there is a cure for the Flood in this universe, it all falls apart. So I don't know how they're going to play that out. It's the Silver timeline. It finds a way to disappoint me every single time. So we're going to see how that one plays out. And just to wrap up some other things with the Flood, Soren catches up with his family, with Kwan, and as they're escaping, Kwan is doomed. She's kind of surrounded by the infected, and she's fucked. She's like caught in the vent. She's going to die. But then the shaman appears and just kind of stops everything so Kwan can just walk out. I don't know where they're going with that. I got no idea. I thought it was dumb. It just seemed like plot armor for Kwan to escape and live another day. But then as they're escaping, it turns out that Soren's wife is infected, and she locks a door in front of herself so everyone else can escape, and she's there being infected. So that's the end of her. Good, that character sucked. She was a total bitch anyway, so I'm totally fine with her being killed off. But then, Master Chief lands on a Halo ring. Yes, it took us 2 seasons, but we are actually on a Halo ring. No weird digital fucking shit going on. We're actually on a Halo ring. And the ring itself, yeah, it looked fine. The Forerunner structures around it looked fine. And then that brings us to Master Cheeks catching up with the Arbiter and Mackie. But before that happens, Kai has to sacrifice herself to take out the huge Covenant ship. And she rams another Covenant ship into it, destroying it. So yeah, pretty much Silver Team is completely off the board. It does really look like Season 3 is just going to be a very, very, very loose adaptation of Combat Evolved. But I don't even know how they're going to do that. So with all that, Master Chief catches up to the Arbiter and Mackie. They have a fight. The fight itself was okay. It was just the camera work. It was so shaky. You have 2 people having a sword fight with energy swords. There's no reason to have this crazy ass shaky cam. There's just no reason to have the camera shaking like Michael J. Fox is holding it during this sword fight. And there is a part where the Arbiter gets an upper hand against Master Chief, and I'm not going to go on my Arbiter rant. Go check out our Arbiter video on this channel. There's no reason to care about this Arbiter. He continuously refers to his redemption and his shame and all that type of stuff. And knowing the history of how Arbiters work, we know nothing about why this Arbiter is an Arbiter, so there's just no reason to care. Okay, but anyway, so as this Arbiter gets the upper hand against Master Chief, he pulls out his grapple shot and he starts turning into like Scorpion from Mortal Kombat. Yeah, that was fine. And then he beats the living fuck out of this Arbiter before stabbing him. And there you go, the Arbiter's dead. So the Arbiter got, what, like 2 kills this whole season? He killed an elite and... Oh wait, no, he killed a few elites actually. He got 1 human kill as far as we know, as far as I can remember, and that was Vanek. Right, so this Arbiter's completely off the board. He's dead as shit. And then that leads us to the final scene, which actually loops back to the start of this episode. Master Cheeks, yes, not Chief, we're back to being Master Cheeks. He has his helmet off, and he's talking to an oracle. So that's how the episode starts and how the episode ends. So it seems like the start of the episode is kind of like him telling the oracle how he got to this point, and then it ends with him putting on his helmet and part of his visor is destroyed. During his fight with the Arbiter, you can see his visor getting a few cracks, but his visor when he's talking to the monitor is just completely destroyed there. So who knows how that happens, and that's how Season 2 ends. This show sucks. I want to be very fucking clear. This show sucks ass. Bad, infected, donkey ramming ass, right? But there was actually some good stuff in this episode. This episode was the closest it had been to being a genuine Halo show. As an adaptation, this show is pathetically bad. As just a show in general, this show is pathetically bad. But I feel like I would be being disingenuous if I said every single thing about this episode was shit and ignored the good stuff about this episode. Don't get me wrong. There's no redeeming this show. It is fundamentally fucked. And especially going into Season 3, which, again, I can only assume is going to be a very loose, emphasis on loose, adaptation of the first video game being Combat Evolved. There's no Pillar of Autumn, there's no Jacob Keys, there's no ODSTs. Now, ODSTs are actually the ones that create the bases that the UNSC use in the first Halo game. They explain that in the book, but there are no ODSTs. I don't know how they're going to do this. It's going to suck, I can tell you that much. Oh, and we also don't know how Mackie's still alive, by the way.
Then I'm a demon too.